The environment minister, he was a lobbyist for Cycle Capital. Cycle Capital companies got more than $200 million from the Liberal Green Slush Fund. Wow. Now we learn he is still a big shareholder.
How would you like to not pay tax on overtime work? Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. In today's top story, we've got Pierre Poilievre getting asked a question from someone at a press conference here regarding a statement that Donald Trump said he'd be removing tax off of overtime hours. He asked this question to Pierre Poilievre. I think many Canadians would be in support of this. We've also got a couple clips from CTV, one of them of Jagmeet Singh, his undying support for workers. And it doesn't matter if it's a confidence vote, he's supporting workers all the way to the end. So they talk about that. We've also got Danielle Smith talking to Vasi Capellos. Vasi's playing bad cop, and Danielle Smith just gives her the straight goods. Let's jump into this. What you're about to see here is a guy asking Pierre Poilievre if he would support taking off income tax off of overtime work. This is going to get a lot of support in Canada.
I want to ask you a question. So I heard you saying about axing the tax and making life easier for Canadians. What do you think about Donald Trump? Like, he just mentioned that he's gonna take off the tax from overtime. So are you thinking something like that? Because a lot of Canadians are working like really hard and they get a lot of tax taken from overtime. They're just doing overtime because it's very hard to afford. So are you thinking about that, like considering like overtime tax cut off?
I'm open to it. I'm definitely open to it. We need a big tax cut to reduce, particularly for people who are working overtime. Right now, people are, it was funny, it was at the Thunder Bay grain handling terminal, and the manager said, I gave everybody a bonus. I thought they'd be happy. Then the pay stubs went out for that year, for that month, and everyone was in my office saying, the government took it all. Yeah. It was, they got a bonus, so they move into a higher tax bracket. The government swoops in and takes the fruits of the workers' labor, and it takes from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is like a war on work that we have in this country. So I'm open to it. I'm going to study it, figure out how it would work, and how I want to make sure whatever we do doesn't cause more administrative and complexity, where people, have to say, well, this income was from regular hours and that income was for overtime hours, and now you have to worry about auditors coming in and checking, which hours you were taxed at which rate. So we have to make sure that it doesn't end up creating too much complexity and so on.
That's hilarious, because Justin Trudeau would do the opposite. They do everything possible to create more complexity and cost us more money, like administering the carbon tax, $200 million. We got Pierre Poilievre here who wants to cut things and make things cheaper and actually help us. Wow, that's a great plan. We actually have figured it out, how much OT you can work before you lose more in taxes. This would mean some serious cash in my pocket. The left will find any reason to criticize this. It would be a juggernaut of a policy. It would have to be done, and done immediately, not years from now. We've got this segment here with CTV. It says key Canadian political issues to watch. They mostly talk about American things, but the end here, they start talking about Jagmeet and the NDP regarding the whole thing here with the port strikes and the Canada Post strike, and Jagmeet saying he's going to vote with the people for the workers against Justin Trudeau to take him down in a confidence motion. Let's check out what they had to say on this.
A lot of eyes, though, remain on the New Democrats and, what it's going to take for them to continue to prop up the government and how they respond to the U.S. election. I'm not sure it matters, that much. It's just more a question of when are you going to say, okay, Justin Trudeau, that's it, we're done supporting you, let's go to an election.
And the interesting thing is, on that point, so far it's been nothing that can bring them there. And Jude, I'll give the last word to you. The one thing that Jagmeet Singh has signaled could be, I guess if I'm being generous, a red line, is issues around labor. And boy, oh boy, does he have a very recent example in the strike at the ports and the lockout at the ports, and the move that the government made to force that into binding arbitration and sort of order everyone back to work. Like, if not that, what?
Yeah, it's a bit complicated on those issues, though, because I think Canadians are also very frustrated with things just not working, especially from the pandemic, just slowdowns in government processing, consequences for the economy. And so I think a lot of Canadians would be very concerned if, for example, the rails were shut or other elements of the key to the economy, ports, et cetera, were down. I don't know if Canadians would tolerate that. So I understand that that's what the New Democrats have focused on. But I think what you see from the Trump election is that people are just frustrated and they're fed up and they want things to work in the economy for them. I think what's going to be very interesting is to see how what lessons the Liberals learn, I guess, from the Trump election. What issues do they focus on? Do they continue talking about abortion? Do they pivot? And also whether the Conservatives keep doing what they're doing, or do they feel like they can get an extra boost from maybe jumping on the same waves that put Donald Trump in the White House. I think that's going to be what the story to watch, not just in the next few weeks, but into next year as well.
Oh, yeah. I cannot consume enough people talking about that stuff right now. It's so interesting. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. As always, JD Belmos, Steph Levitz, and Najoud Al-Malik.
What Canadians are tired of is Jagmeet Singh saying he's a man of the people, and then all he does is supports Justin Trudeau. That's what Canadians are tired of. Spineless politicians with no backbone, with no honor, with no dignity, with no self-respect. We're tired of it. Speaking of which, we've got Jagmeet's riding here, Burnaby Central. I believe that's the new one. They've changed these borders around. But look at this. Conservatives. Old Jag here doesn't have a necessary lock on his seat. He may lose his seat. This is going to be the end of his political career. And if he doesn't back up what he just said about supporting workers and taking down Trudeau, these numbers will plummet and he will be done. His political career will be done. How about a prison shuffle? They're talking about shuffling politicians out the door. Yeah, we can shuffle them right into the nearest maximum security prison. Sean Fraser must go. Where is the other Randy? Canada needs an election. Up next here, we've got Danielle Smith and Vasi Kapellos talking about oil and gas emissions caps. And Danielle Smith really lays out everything that's involved here and why Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault are absolute losers. She explains why this is going to destroy Canada, why it's going to be absolutely detrimental to our economy going forward, and what they should be doing instead.
We're going to need to think about, whether we focus on energy security in a way that makes us clearly an important part of the U.S. sector that way. And that means we have to ask ourselves, is it really the right time for caps on emissions?
Former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau there calling on the federal government to consider delaying its emissions cap on the oil and gas sector. Why? The imminent return of Donald Trump to the White House. He says Ottawa should be focused on policies that better align Canada with the incoming administration. His comments were welcomed by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who has long been a vocal critic of Ottawa's plans to regulate the sector. But when I put Morneau's comments this week to Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, he rejected the idea of a delay outright. With me now to talk more about this is Alberta's Premier.
Yeah, Wilkinson's an absolute loser, though.
Premier Danielle Smith. Hi, Premier. Good to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
You bet. Thanks, Vashi.
I wanted to start off on that cap because you have been opposed to it from the start. The federal government says bending on it now would throw their climate plan into jeopardy, even when the new administration south of the border is taken into account. Don't they have a point there?
No, they don't. I mean, not bending on some of the direction they've taken, it will jeopardize our relationship with the United States, which is the largest trading relationship that we have, not only Alberta, but all of our provincial counterparts. We know one of the things that the new White House wants is energy security. We have the ability to offer that. And if you put on the table an emissions cap, which we know will cause a cap in production, you're not going to be able to negotiate in a way that's going to be best for Canada. So if they want to have a Team Canada approach, it means the emissions cap has to be off the table.
If you've got a government of a country hindering themselves, why would another country like America think they would want to get into deep business with a country that hurts their own people? They can obviously see the country is corrupt, it's run by losers, and those are people you don't want to get into business with. That's what's going to happen with Trump here and Trudeau. That's why Trudeau's got to go, and he's got to go right now.
You know for certain that it would amount to a production cap. You've been critical of the impact of climate policies levied so far by the federal government, and yet this year there are record exports to the United States of oil and gas, and there are oil specifically, I should say, and there is also a record level of production of that. So how do you know for sure that what the federal government is proposing, which by the way is even on the low end of what they had floated a number of months ago, is necessarily going to be a production cap?
Well, it's because you have to wait for the technology to develop. And one of the ways in which our industry is going to decarbonize is by rolling out small modular reactors. We know that the time frame for developing the regulatory environment and getting those implemented is no sooner than 2035. So if you set targets for 2030, and 2035, the only way to reach them, if you don't have the technology on emissions reduction, is to shut in production. It's really just simple math. What we have always been advocating for is give industry the time frame that they need, which they say is 2050, so that we have time to develop the technology, implement the technology, develop out carbon capture, utilization, and storage, build that pipeline infrastructure, bring in new types of power sources. You can't do that with the snap of a fingers. You certainly can't do that within the short time frame that they've talked about. And so the only option is a production cap, and we'll be fighting that every step of the way.
They're talking 10 years here, like 11 years. These are guys, Stephen Guilbeault, Justin Trudeau, they want everything to be electric. They want everything to run on unicorn farts. They don't even invest in our power grid to support electric vehicles and all these utopian dreams of theirs. Like, it's absolutely absurd.
To that point, there is some flexibility, some compliance flexibility built into the plan. And beyond that, again, when you talk about all the technological development, you're taking industry's word for how long it's going to take. Ultimately, if they don't develop the technology, then the alternative for them is to cut production. But isn't that on them?
Well, I would say that we have to work on a timescale that operates in the real world. We know that carbon capture, utilization, and storage does work. We've already safely stored 14 megatons of CO2 emissions. But we also know that it takes a long time with permitting and approval, with Indigenous consultation, with landowner consultation, and the timescales for getting things built. That can't be done in 5 years. Everyone knows that. And so I think that the reason why the federal government has put forward such aggressive targets is because they want to sell it to the public as an emissions cap, knowing full well it is a production cap and it's a violation of the Constitution. And that's why we will continue to fight against it.
I mean, if we don't develop technology, we're just going to abandon the oil and gas that actually is the lifeblood of modern society. What kind of stupid idea is that? You have to develop the technology, then transition over, not put in these caps that hinder the current production when we don't even have the next thing developed. What kind of stupid government do we have in power here?
Is there a chance, though, that they are actually trying to ensure that those companies that you reference, that industry that you reference, actually does more than pay lip service to reducing emissions? I mean, the oil patch is a huge economic boon to this country. There is no way I would take away from the contribution that it makes to the Canadian economy. But it also contributes, to the emissions, the overall emissions. It's 30% of all the emissions in this country. If you slow down the process of reducing those emissions, how can you say that you're really about fighting the effects of climate change?
Look, if they wanted to show me they were serious, they would say that they're, as part of declaring their climate emergency, they are going to fast track the approvals on developments. They would give the money to build the pipeline so it could be done in 1 year. They would assist us in developing a regulatory environment so that we could roll out small modular reactors in 2 years. I'm not hearing any of that discussion.
This is checkmate. She's right. They would help fast track stuff. The Trudeau Liberals don't care about anything but actually just hurting our country. Everything they do, look at every single policy. Today I was thinking, Vasi Capello's here. She plays devil's advocate. She always tries to play the opposite side. And I was trying to think about that. Any Trudeau policy, every single policy hurts our country. What are they doing that actually helps us? It's always a smoke and mirrors thing, whether it's the National School Food Program. They're not delivering meals. Trudeau's just trying to stick his name on the provincial school food programs, try to seem like a hero. It's a narcissistic move. I mean, look at anything. Everything they've done doesn't help us.
They aren't interested in changing the regulatory approval process. They aren't interested in working with us on streamlining some of those approvals. If we wanted to fast track things so that they could have a faster implementation, then I'm sure the industry would work with them. But what they're asking the industry to do is the impossible. Is that they're asking them to go through a regulatory process that they know will take decades and then meet these emissions targets within 5 years. And the only way to do it is a production cap. That's why we have been fighting against it. We've said if we need to have the longer time frame to unfold this, then give a longer time frame so that we have the ability to continue doing our production.
Canada is the only country on earth that has put a cap on oil and gas emissions. Why would that be? Why would no other country do that? Because it would hurt that country's economy. Period. Stephen Guilbeault has got some twisted agenda. I can't figure out the guy if he's just mentally deranged. Is it strictly for profits? I mean, the guy was caught with $225 million scandal recently.
The The Environment Minister is already under fire for his $30 billion carbon tax cover-up. He was a lobbyist for Cycle Capital. Cycle Capital companies got more than $200 million from the Liberal Green Slush Fund. Wow. Now we learn he is still a big shareholder in Cycle Capital. And since becoming Environment Minister, Cycle Capital companies have gotten another $17 million from the Green Slush Fund. Liberal insiders getting rich on taxpayer money, a carbon tax cover-up, the Environment Minister profiting from the Green Slush Fund sleaze. When will Liberal corruption end? Never.
I mean, really, that should be life in prison for fraud against the Canadian taxpayer. Put him in jail for 40 years for that.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Never further question. You know what's profiting for all the work of this government and all the members in this House is record investment in green technologies in this country, Mr. Speaker.
Look at this squirrely little rat back here. He can't even defend himself. He's such a weak, pathetic little man.
We rank number one ahead of China for the battery ecosystem, Mr. Speaker, in this country, and I have more.
A disgraceful minister in a disgraceful situation.
Is it your position, based on what you just said, that if the federal government were to change the regulatory process, for example, to issue permits faster, that actually it is feasible for the technology to meet those deadlines? Because that's what it sounded like.
The first small modular reactor, as I understand it, is being rolled out in Darlington in 2026. And once you've established the framework for that, it should be fairly straightforward to be able to roll it out elsewhere. We've never had nuclear in our province, but when I talk to the officials about what it would take to get there, they're telling me the earliest is 2035. Look, I mean, we have to understand the reason why tens of billions of dollars have left our country is because of a federal regulatory process where there is no end in sight. We lost the Tech Frontier mine. We lost Energy East. We've lost multi-billion-dollar projects because the federal government has created such a convoluted process where there isn't a clear pathway to finishing. So I'm not going to hold out hope that all of a sudden they're going to see the light after 9 years and come up with a process that's going to allow this. If it's going to take the time, we need to give industry the time to be able to do it. And we simply are not going to agree to any kind of arbitrary emissions cap that we know will shut in our production. We're just not going to do it.
If we're going to switch to small modular nuclear, then they need to develop the technology, make sure it's sound, build some of it out, have it take off a good portion of that baseload power, and then just replace it one-to-one like this. Bring up the nuclear, reduce the oil and gas. This is common sense. This should be common sense.
And I do understand your point about concerns when it comes to the regulatory process more generally. But I remember covering all those issues along the way. And there were, segments of the population who felt they would be directly impacted by the development of that. And then even wider swaths of the population who felt that they would increase production to a level that would negatively impact emissions growth insofar as emissions would grow at an even more rapid rate. And climate change impacts would grow as a result of that in turn. And so the opposition, was real. It wasn't just fabricated by the government. And it wasn't just because the regulatory process wasn't great, which I know the criticism is valid of. Like, there were real concerns. Those concerns still exist.
Well, look, here's the future as I see it, that natural gas is a build out to what will ultimately be a hydrogen economy, those same networks are going to be used to transport hydrogen, which has zero emissions. I look at our development of bitumen, because 6,000 different products can come from a barrel of oil, and one of the most valuable ones is asphalt, which my understanding is 60% of the product goes to make, or lubricants or other types of petrochemicals. Increasingly over time, we will have non-combustion uses for these products. We will have construction uses for these products. We just have to decarbonize at the production end. And I've mentioned the way we would do that. We do it through carbon capture, and we would also do it through small modular reactors. There is a future for natural gas and conventional oil and bitumen that allows for us to continue developing it. I think that the framework that the federal government present is that they believe that this industry is going to be phased out. It is not going to be phased out. The emissions are going to be phased out. We are still going to have a very robust bitumen, oil, and gas exporting market, and that's why we can't do anything that's going to compromise it prematurely.
This is insane we're even having this conversation. Like, it's well known that oil is used in so many products. Like, as many of you know, I'm big into hiking, backpacking, mountaineering, a lot of the tents, a lot of the fabrics. All that stuff comes from oil. Oil's not going to disappear anytime soon. Plastics, ropes, food cups, flooring, insulation, foam cushions, synthetic rubber, tires, detergents, solvents, cleaning products, furniture, carpets, paint, glues, adhesive, cosmetics, surgical gloves, contact lenses, medical equipment, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, lubricants, hydraulic fluids, antifreeze, insulation for electrical wires, plastic casings for phones and computers, televisions, crayons, synthetic leather, sporting equipment, packaging materials, candles, inks, and dyes. In what world do we reduce oil and gas production when it is one of the most primary things used on Earth? This makes no sense. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Alberta calls for independence. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. NDP is getting more unpopular by the day for supporting Trudeau. Time for an election. Imagine asking Freeland these same questions. She wouldn't know a single thing. Gotta love this woman. Smart, no salad, answered every question. We're not used to hearing actual answers to questions because the Trudeau Liberals are a bunch of swindlers. Canada could increase oil and gas production 10x with no detrimental effect on climate. That is true. That is definitely true. We're too small. We're just too small to have really any effect on the planet. Jumping over to my group, let's see what memes we've got today. Justin Trudeau has pledged $35 million in Canadian funding for Pacific Rim initiatives, addressing issues such as cybersecurity, domestic violence, reproductive health care. Key projects include $3.9 million investment in Malaysia's BlackBerry Security Center training 35,000 individuals. Like, what the heck, man? Integration of 2,500 Venezuelan refugee doctors into Peru's medical system, expanding nuclear energy collaborations across Southeast Asia to support AI. It's money laundering. That's what that is to me. Why would we spend our money across the world? That doesn't help us. We got this here, a scene inside transit station. It's just people, zombie land, complete zombie land. This is funny. Downtown Japan, they fixed this in 7 days, this giant sinkhole. We got 16 years here. Pension before country. There's no such thing as global warming. Chuck Norris was cold, so he turned up the sun. These never die, do they? Average rental prices across Canada. This is crazy. Just 9 years ago, a lot of places it'd be $1,200, $800, $1,500. Vancouver was $1,700. That was the top. You get into smaller towns, just $600, $500. He's back on the sauce again, sip and sing. Southside Surrey into house. Mike Tyson following the script. How do we combat mis and disinformation? Yeah, turn off the CBC. I think the main thing we can take from this episode is if Pierre Poilievre decides to take off taxes from overtime work, he's going to further bring in another wave of supporters.